President Trump recently to take some action where he put out a statement and said, hey, we're pulling all U.S. aid from Nigeria. We're not going to let anything go there. And by the way, I'm going to let my Secretary of War prepare some plans because I want to know if we need to go in there and deal with the fact that they're murdering Christians en masse. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Under God podcast. I'm Daniel. I'm joined with our host, Pastor Stephen Martin. We're going to be going through our weekly culture review today. Pastor Stephen, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I had an opportunity to review the topics, and I am very excited about most of them.
Yeah, I'm about most of them. I picked the topics, so whichever one he's not excited about, those are the ones he's not excited about. We are actually going to be talking about a handful of things today. We're going to be talking about this really tragic story of Christians being massacred in Nigeria. We're also going to talk about the Trump administration and how they're stepping into that. We're going to talk about the elections. We're recording this on election day, so you guys are going to know some of the results. We're going to talk about what some of those results will mean one way or the other. We're also going to talk about the rise of anti-Semitism that we've seen in recent days, this really aggressive rise in anti-Semitism, particularly among young men who proclaim to be on the right. We're going to talk a little bit about whether or not they are on the right or whether or not they're not and what to do about it. And then we're also going to talk about the shutdown crisis, which is still ongoing, although I don't know how much of a crisis it is for most people. I think it's the least dramatic government shutdown of my lifetime, but there are some real problems that it's causing. And there's also a real thing that it's highlighted, which is that it seems like everybody's on government food stamps. So we're going to dive into all of that today, starting with this horrible tragedy that's happening right now in Nigeria. And so for those of you that don't know the story, the background is that in Nigeria's sort of middle belt region, there are Christian communities who've been targeted by Muslim radicals, and that's exactly who they are. And this is not only happening in Nigeria, by the way, it's also happening in the Sudan. And so far, the last report I saw said that they have eradicated, burned to the ground, and killed 19,000 different church congregations in Nigeria, which is just almost incalculable. The death tolls aren't even able to be projected right now because it's hard to get information from the country, but they're in the tens of thousands of people, Christians, who have been slaughtered. This is not just people. These are Christians who are explicitly being hunted down and persecuted for their faith by the Muslim radicals, which prompted President Trump recently to take some action where he put out a statement and said, hey, we're pulling all U.S. aid from Nigeria. We're not going to let anything go there. And by the way, I'm going to let my Secretary of War prepare some plans because I want to know if we need to go in there and deal with the fact that they're murdering Christians en masse.
First of all, I think it's really interesting. The word genocide gets thrown around a ton.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's thrown around against the Jews, which are not genocidal in any way. As a matter of fact, they've been genocided before. Yeah. But when you look at the issue in Nigeria, I think the 19,000 churches, that's since 2009.
Yeah. And this is an ongoing thing that's escalated in
it's been going on
since
since 2009. Yeah. I want to remind everybody who was president in 2009, and certainly President Trump has had a term in there as well. But it's escalated to terrible proportions. I've been on the phone with other pastors, and as a matter of fact, going into this last weekend, we were preparing to bring it to our church, and I literally just sent the text to the team to say, hey, we're gonna really talk about this, pray, also mobilize our missions and outreach fund to be able to help and do some things we wanted to do to be able to help with the Christian community there. But as I literally sent that, I saw President Trump's post. Yeah. And it's interesting, when you take a look at, all of the hate that President Trump gets, it's absurd, really, on its face. It's usually about tone. It's not about what he's actually doing. I wish we'd talk nicer. If you've ever been to New York, from where he's from, you realize actually most people from that part of the country talk that way.
He just talks like a normal New Yorker.
Yeah. And so it's just this whole never Trump thing. And as I kind of read his post, and believers were people who say they're believers. I think they're probably wearing Christianity like a skin suit. They were talking about just how aggressive he was and how we don't have any business, whatever. And I just think to myself, thank God for President Trump. Yeah. I worship Jesus. Trump's my president. Yeah. I don't see him as, a deity figure or any of that, but I find it really interesting that unlike any other president, really, in modern history, he surrounded himself by believers in the Faith Advisory Council. He actually has a cabinet level member that represents the Christian community. And man, his response was absolutely Romans 13. And I loved it. I love Romans 12. That's my job as a pastor. The gospel, preaching, teaching, making disciples, contending for the faith. But Romans 13 really talks a lot about government stepping in, biblical government, established and ordained by God, has a biblical definition of justice and actually punishes the evildoers. And so I was very, very excited. We prayed for the community this weekend, but I think it's interesting, when you see Christians being slaughtered all over the world. By the way, Christians are the most persecuted in all of
the world. And all over the course of time.
Oh, right? The last 2,000 years for sure. And then our Jewish brothers and sisters are right there as well. You never hear anybody saying anything. And I think the church has to wake up and has to actually contend for those of the faith. And by the way, they're not being killed because of the color of their skin. They're not being killed because of their political affiliation. They're literally being killed simply because they're Christians. And this is something we're going to be taking very seriously in the coming weeks and months. We're going to be talking really about Islam. We tend to use this adjective radical, but when you study Islam, really anybody who actually adheres to the teachings of Islam is radical. Like they are dangerous.
If you hold the true tenets of the Islamic faith, it is a radical religion by nature.
It is.
And the fact is that in our culture, we've largely whitewashed it, and there is an Americanized version of Islam that the Middle East largely does not practice. The Americanized version, most people who are Muslim in the United States, if they go back to the Middle East, right, it's an unrecognizable thing to them. It's just a totally different version. But the truth is, Islam is not a peaceful religion, right? It's not the religion of peace. It's a religion that is a religion of conquest and subjugation and brutality, and that's the fact.
Yeah, and there's a great book on the Crusades called Dominion. I would encourage anybody to get it and to read it. We were kind of taught that it was Christians that kind of colonized, dominated the world.
We're the wrong side of the Crusades.
And there were certainly issues in the Crusades, certainly overreach, certain how they got started. How they got started was not how they ended, but it really was pushing back against the Islamic conquest of the world. And Islam literally means to submit, essentially submit or die or pay a fee to be tolerated in our culture, whereas Israel, it means to wrestle with God. And when we're talking about, what we're seeing, I mean, you see this kind of red-green alliance. You see kind of the LGBTQ socialist communist thing rising, and then you see Islam. And I think it's important, just for clarity for believers, when you're thinking about, the left and wokeism, really that's really a religious ideology dressed up like a political one. When you're thinking about Islam is actually a political ideology dressed up like a religious one. And so a lot of people are like, how in the world can they go together? Well, they go together till they don't. But essentially, they're aimed at Christendom, at the Judeo-Christian West. And so this really is the next big thing that we see erupting in our nation. But I'm very excited. I'm very encouraged that our Department of War, that they're getting into this, because it really needs to be gotten into. And so I applaud that. I'm America first, but I'm not America only. And I do believe we're a beacon. I'm not really into the nation buildings, particularly with cultures that are never going to believe and
they're never going to operate off of our boundaries.
But if there's places where we can do good and we don't do it, I think that's wrong. So I think it's important.
I think that's what President Trump is really saying too. When he put out his statement, he said, hey, look, we cherish our Christians, right? We love these people, and we're not just going to let them be slaughtered en masse. It's funny. I had a friend, one of my very closest friends when I was growing up. Him and his family had started a orphanage in Nigeria, and the persecutions were going on there too. And his parents elected for him to live in the States with some family on and off. His parents planted this orphanage. They lived there. It's their full-time ministry. He lived there for years. He came back to do high school with us full-time. And when he came back, his dad, who was over in Nigeria, ended up getting pulled over when he was driving a bus full of the orphans, and Muslim radicals blew his face off with a shotgun. And his dad ended up surviving, barely. And, I just think about, that as I've been thinking about Nigeria, which is that this has been a problem for a long time, which is that the Muslim radicals just think that they can come in and they can kill the Christians because it's what their religion mandates, which is that they're gonna subjugate, they're gonna kill those who don't convert. And that's the same thing, by the way. The history of Islam is that right after Muhammad died, immediately there was a political conquest through the Arab Peninsula and all of these other things. It's immediate. It's their history. And to pretend otherwise just leaves us in this position where people are going to be persecuted all across the world. And what President Trump is doing is he's stepping in and he's saying, no, we're not going to let that happen so far as it depends on us. And I think that's exactly the right response.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about, the radical left or you're talking about Mohammedism, the thing you need to understand about evil, and this is something that Christians need to start to read the Bible in the times we're in and really take it seriously, because the truth is evil doesn't stop unless you stop it. Yeah. Who stops evil? Those who are contending for righteousness.
Those who love justice and mercy and are walking humbly.
Absolutely. So I'm very happy to see that.
Yeah,
I'm very happy to see some movement.
I think that's going to be a story that continues developing. We're going to continue to come back to that, and we pray for our brothers and sisters. Those are our brothers and sisters in Christ. Like, we're going to see those people in heaven, and they're going to have an honor that none of us had because they all died as martyrs, right? They all died as martyrs for their faith. Yeah. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk next about some domestic issues, which is that today is election day. And so in Texas, we have some things that are on the ballot, but we're not the big story on election day this year. The big story of election day this year, there's a few key races across the country that I think are really going to set the trajectory for the next several years of the nation, or at least our political culture. The big one of those is the financial capital of the entire world, New York City, which we've talked about before, has their election today. So does this really contentious election in Virginia, where Jay Jones, who called for the murder of children for Republican candidates and said, no, I'm really serious. I want them to have their children murdered. The governor's race in Virginia, the gubernatorial candidate said, I stand with that guy, the guy running for AG. It's okay that he wants them to have their children murdered. And then, of course, the big one is Republicans are pushing in New Jersey to get Jack Ciattarelli elected there. And so what do you think, what takes on any of these races? What's your outlook on the country politically? How do you think it's going to go?
Well, I think this is going to be, some people have called this a bellwether to next year's, elections, midterms. I don't know that I necessarily believe that. I think what we're seeing is a complete unmasking of the reality of the Democratic Party. Yeah. I think when you think of a moderate Democrat, I think those days are over. I mean, you certainly have what's the Fetterman?
Yeah, Fetterman.
He's probably the most moderate, but you have,
and even he votes with Joe Biden 90% of the time.
You look at Hakeem Jeffries, and you look at all of these, Cory Booker. You look at all these people endorsing Mamdani, getting behind the candidate. Even Hochul in New York, I mean, literally endorsed him, and then he looked at her and said, "You're not radical enough," and wouldn't even reciprocate the endorsement. It's just they haven't policed the radicals in their own party, and there are radicals on both sides, certainly. But they've been completely overcome. And it's interesting, too, when you take a look at the leadership of this radical left kind of coming up into the Democratic Party. They're almost all focused in New York. Yeah. And we're kind of seeing this bastion. Whether or not that's a bellwether for the rest of the nation, I think most people are sane. I think a lot of New Yorkers are waking up realizing, what have we done? Yeah. I think Mamdani was kind of not taken seriously at the beginning. There's also some serious issues with his immigration paperwork. There's there's all kinds of things. We just don't enforce the law. These radicals come in. He has Ugandan citizenship. Yeah. Like, what in the world?
He's been in the country as a citizen for like 8 years, and now he's about to be the mayor of our largest city.
It's insane. And when you really break it down, and I've talked to a lot with the Jewish community in New York, certainly the conservative Jewish community. There's a large contingent of leftist Jews in New York City. But when you look at that community, it's their kids that have gone through these indoctrination centers in the university that are buying into all this crap. Yeah. I mean, that's literally who's getting him elected right now. And when you take a look at even the options, I mean, you have Cuomo, disgraced, pushed from the governorship in New York through how he handled COVID and some sexual allegations and all of this. You have Siwa, I think, which is the only Republican.
Curtis Sliwa. Yeah.
They can't even bring themselves to, they hate Trump so much, they can't even bring themselves to save their city from a radical jihadi Marxist. Yeah. They can't even fathom that. And so they're splitting the vote, and likely you're going to see Mamdani come through and win. And, what happens from there? There are lots of people that'll say, oh, well, it serves them right. I hope they get what they deserve. The truth of the matter is I don't. I mean, I love this nation. New York is a beautiful city with incredible people, many friends I have there. And here's what always happens in these situations. First of all, when people like this take power, when you've looked at any other nation, particularly Mohammedans, taking power, they don't give it up. And they entrench it. And here's what's going to happen. The rich that have options, they're going to leave.
Yeah.
They're going to leave, like cowards, by the way.
They're going to flee to Texas and Florida and all
They're going to leave. Then we're going to have to deal with them there. And who's going to be left in New York with this radical Marxist?
Yeah. It's
going to be the people that are going to be hurt the most. And typically in the lower income brackets and those working class people, they're actually going to be hurt the most. And so, to be honest, I kind of cringe when I hear, well, let them get what they deserve. It's like, no, that's not what we want as believers.
I want them to not suffer.
100%.
Yeah.
And so are they going to have to go through some suffering to figure out what in the world's going on and to readjust? Unfortunately, it looks like that.
Yeah. I don't know. I agree with you that I don't know if it's a bellwether for the midterms, but I do think it's a bellwether for the Democratic Party, right? Mm-hmm. Because New York is completely Democrat controlled. And I think right now they're basically doubling down on their radicalism. And it's like you said, they haven't forced the radicals out of their own party. And because of that, I think it is going to speak into what we're going to see for the midterms for them next year and the kind of candidates they try to put up, as well as who they're going to try and put up for their presidential nominee in 2028. Because I think they're going to look at this and they're go, oh, the most radical person that we had won. He was super popular with some of the young Gen Z people who believe that they're dispossessed and they have, they have all these student loans and he's capitalizing on all the free stuff and he's really rallying this base of people, and we're going to continue to lean into that. And so maybe they start to lean away from some of the issues that have ostracized voters, like the transgenderism thing, but I don't even know if that's the case. I think that they're really just going to double down on candidates like this, because they're going to look at New York and they're going to think, well, it worked. And so this is where our party is going to continue to move. The question for the country that comes out of that, I think, has to do with, okay, well, are they going to be able to get all of these young voters activated and pull them over to this radical leftism through another means, which is just straight Marxism, right? Is this going to be the thing that unlocks the door to that generation for them and that voting bloc and really activates them? He's done it he seems to be doing it in New York. Are they going to make that national? Is it going to be successful? I don't know the answer nationally, but I can say I think that this is basically the Democratic Party saying this is the direction we're going to continue to run.
Yeah, I think you're going to see that, and only time will tell where we go from there.
Yeah, I do want to talk also, while we're talking about sort of federal politics, I want to talk about the ongoing Democrat shutdown, which has been going on for several weeks now. And we're at a point where over the weekend, the SNAP benefits run out that's the Nutrition Assistance Program, which is a federally funded program. And one of the things that I was just mind-boggled to watch over the weekend was, as you got online, you got on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, there's all these people that are basically saying, well, my SNAP benefits have run out and now I'm going to go steal, right? Because it's my only source. But they're not just, hey, I'm just going to go steal what I need to feed my family. Even they're like, I'm going to go steal the best of the stuff, which is what I was getting on SNAP benefits. And then a court stepped in and tried to force the Trump administration to like, I don't know, like rub a couple coins together and make more. Like they said, no, you have to reactivate it. And he's saying the government's shut down because we're out of money. What do you want me to do? Exactly. Like, I mean, what do you think of this? What do you make of these people's entitled attitudes? What do you make of the courts trying to step in? I mean, what do you think about this whole situation?
Well, I think it's a bummer, and I think Christians we can have an argument and we can have a debate about how much money we feel like should go into the social safety net. But what you're actually seeing is kind of the mixture of two things. You're literally seeing the Democratic Party holding this program hostage.
Yeah.
It's radicals and it's people. By the way, they already know how to steal because they're obviously able, working-bodied adults that could be working, but they're not going to work, and so they're going to take the benefits. So they've already been stealing, But those people who really depend on that, I mean, there's lots of people that's a safety net that gets them back on their feet and helps them, and so you literally see the cruelty of the Democratic Party. Yeah. You see it. You see they're willing to use this as a bludgeon against the Republican Party, which is interesting. Most government shutdowns always diminish the one that's in power. That during the shutdown, we see kind of the opposite happening here. We actually see a vast majority of Americans are looking and going, no, actually, we see exactly what the Democratic Party's doing. I mean, they wanted to pass just a continuing resolution, which just continued Biden-era spending. Yeah.
We just wanted to keep doing what we were doing.
They didn't add anything. They didn't do any of this. And the Democratic leadership they're literally using the misery of people as leverage. Yeah. And we see them doing that. They wanted to wait for the No Kings protest, and then they want to wait for SNAP benefits so that it can come against. Now, you're following me now. They just want to keep this thing going. I can't imagine how it continues. It's not going to go good for the Democratic Party at large. They really just have nothing to stand on but hate Trump and shut down anything Trump did. That literally is what makes you a leader in the Democratic Party. Yeah. You just hate the other person.
Well, and I think that's why they did it. So what's funny about this whole situation is that at the start of it, when people said, what are you against? Like, what are you trying to shut down the government for? There really wasn't a coherent answer. And the idea, I think, was we're just going to shut down the government and blame it on the Republicans. And that's worked so many times before that it's going to work this time. And then when it wasn't working, they kind of had to come up with this answer, and they started throwing things out like, well, we're doing it because we want healthcare benefits for who? Illegal aliens? Yeah. Like what are they doing? And they just don't have a good answer for this because they don't actually want to do anything. They just want it to hurt Trump. And now that it's not hurting Trump, I think you're starting to see the knees shake in the Democrat politicians. But like you're saying, it's to the expense of people who.
Well, and this is where I'll go for a minute. When you take a look at the makeup of the Democratic Party, there I think something like 6 or 7, 9. Moderate Democrats have to come over, and they're struggling with that. Yeah. And here's what I'll tell you, because there are no moderates. Yeah. And they literally run, with all the talk of fascism, I mean, they literally run their party with an iron fist. Yeah. I mean, that nobody steps out of line, contrary to our side, which is always arguing about everything, sometimes ad nauseum, about the details. The Democratic Party, they walk in lockstep. And it'll be interesting to see if they'll be able to. There was some talk about, the nuclear option, which the Thune is like not going to do, which is essentially nuking the filibuster. I would personally say our founders never even considered that to be an option. Yeah. It's kind of a weird thing that they've added where you have to get to a 60 vote threshold. There are lots of people on both sides of that saying, well, if you remove it, they're just going to do the same thing to us. It's like, I'm kind of thinking to myself, like,
they're going to do it
who
anyway.
Cares? Yeah. I mean, eventually that's going to happen. And so there's a lot of controversy around that. Ultimately, Congress is really just frozen. Yeah. And that's got to be handled. I'm really happy to see, usually when the Democrats use a shutdown, they want to maximize the pain. Yeah. Barack Obama did this. He closed national parks and things that didn't take anything.
You can't go to the World War II memorial. He just wanted the outdoor one that nobody has to take care of.
He wanted to make it painful. Contrast Trump, which, they say he's a fascist and he's evil. He's trying to alleviate as much of the pain as possible to the point of like he's floating the idea of using tariff revenue, to actually help cover the spread and SNAP benefits.
And he came up with a way in order to fund the military paychecks, which has been a big deal because it's not just the people with SNAP that are dealing with this. It's like the people that are serving in the military, like the people who serve. We are in a military town. Yeah. Most of our church is military. Like our families are actively struggling because they're like, hey, I don't know when this thing is going to end. We have to deal with it. It's a real issue for people, and it's a massive issue for people. And those are good people, like the people in our congregation who are in the military that don't have that level of stability right now. They've chosen to serve. They should get paid. And Trump has gone out of his way to make sure that can happen. But at a certain point, there's a limit to what he's able to do creatively with what's left in other funds and different things in order to get the military paid. And so I pray that he's able to use the political leverage that he has in his arsenal to get this ended so that those people can get paid.
Yeah, I will say this one thing though, but something I am very disappointed with the Trump administration on, and I'm just going to throw it out there because people are like, you just agree with Trump on everything. That's not true. Personally, I think that any of the employees that were furloughed, that were deemed non-essential for the movement of the government, I think should be let go, they should go into the marketplace. I think that we have an incredible opportunity here to trim the government. I totally understand why politically he's not necessarily wanting to do that, mostly because I bet there's a lot of compassion in there. Personally, with our tax rates and our government spending and the waste, I'm kind of to the point where I believe most Americans are. We're kind of just sick of this. Yeah. Like if we wasted money, if we were as incompetent as many of the these government employees, we wouldn't have a job.
Yeah.
And why in the world are we subsidizing this? And so my whole thing is, I don't think there should be the difference between essential and non-essential government workers.
If you don't have an essential job, do something else.
Go do something else. By the way, that will lower our tax burden, allow us to actually do more.
You also have a purpose in life. Like, you'll feel like what you're doing matters.
Yeah,
like
you're not clocking in and clocking out. And there are going to be some big complications this week. We're going to Israel next week, and all the, I was reading about 3.5-hour TSA wait lines in Houston the other day, and that is going to apply some pressure, and it really is. It's
Which you love the TSA so much already.
I don't, but the problem is those machines are there, and we have to get past them. So we need people that get us past them, and so that's going to cause some more pressure. I don't know. I don't really know. I think the Trump administration's heart, Congress is actually to get this thing going so they can pass a good budget, and get out of this continuing resolution. But
this does really highlight how we sort of have this just like vestigial branch of government, which is the U.S. Congress, right? Which they just seem stuck and sort of. And I think
part of the problem is things that are being added. The tradition of the Senate makes it incredibly slow. I mean, the senators are in. Isn't a Senate term 6 years?
Yeah, 6 years.
So they're 6 years. They outlast any president that's in. That was intentional. We have a majority in the Senate. The Senate was not designed to be stopped at 60 votes. And so my personal opinion is like, oh man, it's so dangerous for minority rights. It's like, well, the Senate, you still have the president, you still have three branch. Like, I don't really understand. I think they need to get rid of the filibuster. I think that's completely clogging the wheels. And then maybe people will take more seriously who they vote for their senator. And I think, so anyway, that's my opinion on it.
I actually am pro going back to the legislatures electing senators. I think we shouldn't do direct election of senators.
I love that,
but that's like a whole.
They did that for a long time.
That's a whole nother topic. I want to talk before we close out today. I want to talk about this rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen on the right. There's been a couple of big stories in the news. It's been a big focus, and it's a big thing that I think you and I have both seen, not just anecdotally or online. Like, we've experienced this. We've had young men who have stepped in the doors of our church. They've heard us take stances on Israel, and they've walked up to us and just been full of a level of vitriol. And I will say, there are some of them who have just been lied to, and they're willing to hear the truth of God's word. And we are always going to be willing to have those discussions with the young men who just are confused and lied to. But there is also a class of these people who they don't want to receive anything. All they want to do is blame Jews and the state of Israel, and everything is controlled by them, and that's their worldview. It's really it's becoming central to their identity in a lot of these young men. And you've seen a lot of talk about Nick Fuentes online recently. Pastor, what are we to make of this?
Well, I would say you definitely have anti-Semitism, and when you look at the world, again, I always challenge believers, you got to put your spiritual eyes on. Charlie Kirk, he would constantly remind people that we're fighting in the natural, but we're fighting a spiritual war. Right. So for a spiritual war, you have to have a spiritual foundation, to which case this book, the Bible, has to form that foundation. As it relates to anti-Semitism, there's all kinds of opinions. Do you have to support everything Israel does, to not be an anti-Semite? In which case, there's lots of things I don't approve. The Likud party, there's decisions they've made.
Yeah, the answer's no.
I don't like that. But that doesn't mean that I get to be an that doesn't mean I'm an anti-Semite, first of all, but it also doesn't mean that I don't see where Israel is spiritually. Here's what I use this a lot to cut through. We can get to all kinds of conspiracy theories. There's no shortage of blood libels against the Jews, for sure. But it is spiritual because they're God's people, and that transcends into, I'm just telling you, they come for the Jews first. The Christians are right next to them. We're next, and we are brothers and sisters sharing the values of the Torah. And so, here's what I always like to just simplify it to. Listen, here's why I support the Jewish people. Here's why I'm a philo-Semite, which is a friend of the Jews. If God doesn't keep his promise to the Jewish people, what makes me think as a Christian he's going to keep his promises to me?
Good.
It really is that simple. Now, with the Nick Fuentes and the Andrew Tate, that's a mixture. There's a lot of other things happening. And the truth is, it's all built on this resentment of young men. And here's the thing, and I've been cautioning people here. We can get in here and we can cancel some of their bad ideas, and we can get in and or cancel them because of some of these bad ideas they're adopting. Or we can just admit that, young men, particularly young white cis males, they've been really hated on for the last several decades. Yeah. And there is some legitimate resentment. There's some legitimate resentment when we're $37 trillion in debt. They're going to be saddled with it. They've done everything that they've been told to do. Yeah. By the way, this is the same resentment that Mandami is
he's capitalizing on.
So you have this on both sides. It's like the horseshoe theory, right? You have the left and the right. And there's legitimate resentment with young men. Now, we have to contend against some of these things. These voices are absolutely vile. I mean, Tucker Carlson just had Nick Fuentes on, which I couldn't believe it. He said hateful things about Tucker. It's completely trashed Turning Point, J.D. Vance, Charlie Kirk. Many people don't remember this. I do, because I watched it unfold. But before Charlie Kirk and Turning Point went after the culture wars with the woke, they dealt with the Groypers, which is essentially this fringe ethnocentric, just Superman. I don't even know what you would call it other than just real bigoted and hated, hateful people that really don't share a worldview. So you have the left, which is like the state's God. I'm God. I'm gonna. Truth is subjective. You have the Judeo-Christian foundation of the Bible, and then you have this other right group, which is like kind of like no God really, but that's kind of leaching into this resentment. And it's a big problem. I don't think it's as big as the issue with the Red-Green Alliance. I don't think we should freak out about it, but I do think we have to contend with it and face it.
Yeah.
It's
before it becomes a bigger issue.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop until we stop it. And the thing is, there is no such thing as a Christless conservatism. It just doesn't exist. Yeah. And that's what I think essentially this group is trying to have. Is they're
wearing Christianity as a skin suit.
As a skin suit, and they're proclaiming this, and a lot of these guys go out and they say things that like I actually agree with. They'll use the slogan, "Oh, Christ is King," and I'm like, well, you know what? Jesus is King. He's the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. Yeah, but what you're actually saying when you say that is you're saying I hate Jews.
It's a difference.
And by the way, I know that that's what you're saying because you've said that's what you're saying, right? And you're using that, and that's not the same thing. That's not the same thing as me saying it. You don't get to take part in my religion because you're not real. You're wearing it like a skin suit, like you said. You're a false version of it. And one of the things that I really noticed with a lot of these young men is, like you said, they're capitalizing on this dispossessed attitude, which comes from some really real places. I saw a really interesting interaction. There's a very left woke quote pastor named Anthony Bradley. I think he's out of North Carolina, and he was saying that the reason that Nick Fuentes has gained traction and all this stuff is because the people on the right have allowed vile racism, misogyny, transphobia, and all this stuff for generations. And this pastor, Doug Wilson, who you and I were talking about offline earlier, Doug Wilson said, no, he's gained traction because you called young men who were innocent of really anything at that point in their life, racist, misogynist, all of these other nasty words, their whole childhood growing up. And by the way, like I think I'm like the same. He might be a little bit younger than I am. I don't know exactly. I'm like similar in age to a guy like Nick Fuentes. That's true. Like I grew up in Texas, and I was around people in politics, and the message was very clear, like white young men are the problem. And so there is a group of people who feel dispossessed by this. And then what happens is guys like Fuentes come in and they say, well, where should we fixate that anger? And they've gained traction on fixating it on the Jewish people and on the state of Israel. Why? Because it's exactly what you said, Pastor. It's this spiritual warfare that they can't see and they can't process that's steering them from behind the scenes, influencing them in a way that they can't see. It's a spiritual war that's capitalizing really on this feeling. And they end up right in that same place as the leftist Mohammedans like Mamdani, which is, we don't like the Jews.
Well, there's a lot of nihilism there too, because it's not just anti-Semitism. That's true. They're just the easiest target in our woke world. But it's also like they're essentially going, okay, well, fine, if that's what we are, that's what we're going to be.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
you kind of have this nihilist, you're essentially descending the other way. And I will say this, as we started this podcast talking about, the left and the Democrats not policing their radicals, I think we're at a moment where like we have to be honest about policing our own. Yeah. And those are fringes. And Tucker Carlson, I mean, I'm just going to tell you, I mean, just some of the stuff, Daryl Cooper, he has on saying World War II was Churchill's fault and just, glorifying, the Russian subway while trashing our cities, trying to make a moral equivalence there to the systems, to him having Nick Fuentes on. The truth is, I love Tucker. I mean, I loved listening to Tucker. I don't listen to him anymore. Yeah, and I'm just going to be honest. It's like, there's a difference between asking questions to just stir up controversy and to get clicks.
Yeah.
whereas you ask questions because you want to get to the truth. I don't think you should censor anybody. I personally don't. I think that we still have, we still don't have to affiliate with people. Yeah. We can still, boycott Target because of tucking swimsuits.
Yeah.
And I think at some point we do have some social capital that we're going to have to deal with this. Now, the apprehension of the right to censor its side is to say, oh, well, see, you're canceling people. This is not about cancel culture. Cancel culture is debanking people.
Yeah.
Cancel culture is
kicking them
off of social media, like deleting them, like othering them, or making them a non-person.
You're not allowed to have a voice, is what canceling is.
That's different.
I don't have to listen to your voice, though.
By the way, I'm glad that these people get to speak. Like I love listening to Nick Fuentes because I now know what a complete misogynist, racist person is doing, trying to capitalize on that. But by the way, when you hear someone, you can actually rebut it and you can speak out. But here's the thing: we have to separate canceling from association. At some point, the fringe needs to be the fringe. We can't bring the fringe into the center and try to make friends with it. That's how the Democrat Party moved from Southern Democrats who were pro-life but more liberal in social programs. Live and let live kind of attitude became like radical jihadists taking over, the nation's greatest city in New York. I mean, this is a slippery slope for us too. And I think we're at a place where, we're gonna have to police our own. And I'll tell you, as a pastor, I have no problem doing that. I would point people back to, what are the transcendent realities? Like, what does it mean to have purpose? What does it mean? Those are all questions. Like, what's the meaning of life? Those are all questions that are not found in the secularist project. And it's not found in this, backwards racist thing that we're seeing on the alt-right. It's found in the truth of God's word.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is still what we're seeing ever since Charlie Kirk was martyred. We're seeing massive amounts of people coming to the church, and we've got to have churches that are going to actually disciple these men. One of the conversations I was having with a very, very frustrated Jewish friend, which I totally understand the frustration, that it's always their fault and you tend to react. I totally get it. Is to say, hey, there has to be, we have to like look at these men with compassion. Meaning we meet them where they are, but we get them where God wants them to go.
Yeah.
And to do that, you've got to admit, like, there's some legitimate resentment there that we have to address.
Oh, yeah.
But we have to channel that.
Yeah.
We have to channel that upward right now.
It's being the left and the wrong direction.
It's being channeled downward straight to hell. And that's happening on the right and the left. And so on the fringes. And so I think, time's going to tell. I'm certainly, as a pastor, I know we do in our church, we're certainly going to come against these things. We're going to call fouls on both sides. I still think our biggest enemy is literally being overtaken by Islam. I mean, look at London. Look at London. By the way, London's just a few years ahead of where we are right now with Mondavi.
Yeah.
Mondavi. And so, we have some serious problems. I think we need to kind of prioritize those. But the conservative movement, we can't be shy of policing these fringes in the name of cancel.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't want to cancel them, but we do have to draw some lines on what is the center of what we believe and what is the fringes, and make sure that stays out in the fringe.
Yeah, it's a false dichotomy, by the way, to say you can't police your own side and fight the left at the same side. Like, that's not true. You have to do both. You actually have to. I can't help but think, I don't know if you and I have talked about this before, but I think about this, dispossession of the young men, and I think about the anti-Semitism issue, and I can't help but think that this is really at its root a cause of a fatherless generation.
Yeah.
It's really that this is a father wound in so many of these young men, because, what you just talked about is a really good vision for people. And we talk about it a lot. You call people up and you channel their strengths up and you build them up. Whose job is that? That's dad's job. That's the role of a father. And what we've had an over-mothered, under-fathered generation, and nobody's called them up into goodness because they have all of this strength, and all they've been told is it's bad that you have this strength. And so then they react, they lash out, they have all these problems. And what they need is a father figure to come in and say, hey, son, it's good that you're strong, but you know what? It's not good. It's not good to use that strength to hurt other people. And by the way, it's nobody else's fault that your life is how it is. You may have gotten a bad draw in some ways, but you know what? All God's people have problems. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
That's the job of a dad. And I think that churches right now have to be the voice of the nation. We have to be willing to speak and have to be willing to re-masculinize the church and call these young men up. One of the reasons that there's a problem with it in the church is because the church has been overly feminized too.
Yep.
And we have to be a masculine church that says, no, it's not wrong that God made you exactly who you are. But you know what? I'm going to teach you the right way to use that strength that he gave you. And I'm going to teach you the right way to channel that. I'm going to teach you who you were meant to be. And it's nobody else's fault, because what a lot of it is looking for is blame. Whose fault is it to blame that my life is the way that it is? And Mom Dami has an answer, and Nick Fuentes has an answer, and Andrew Tate has an answer. But at the end of the day, the answer is really what comes from God's word, which is it's your responsibility, and you have to seek after those things, and you have to do it.
Yeah, no, honestly, Daniel, that's an incredible insight. And it's absolutely true. And the reality is where's this discipleship going to happen?
Yeah.
You know, God's a father to the fatherless, but we have this thing called the local church, and that it has to be nested. And we have all of these young men. And here's one of the things I would just say to pastors that may be listening to this, or maybe believers that are in their churches wondering how they can help. You know, here's the thing. When you're dealing with these young men, first of all, you can't treat them like the world's treating them. Like by the way, biblically, this is what God does in our life. The Bible calls us out. You know, men and women of God, they call us out, but not to pull us down. Yeah. They call us out to draw us up. Yeah. And, you know, I think about this when God calls to Moses, you know, to receive the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. He didn't have him come down to him. He had him ascend. You know, when you go into Jerusalem, Mount Zion, it's like there's this moment on the trip when you're going in and you're visiting the Holy Land, you know, where it's like you're going up to Jerusalem, right? You're making Aliyah, you're going up. And that's the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God is like, hey, you know what? I'm going to meet you where you are. And there's going to be things we'll call out and we'll work on along the way, but I'm with you. And as long as we don't quit and we put Christ at the center and we're going up to his plan for us, that's huge. Right. The mistake's going to be, you know, calling out, and you see this on the alt-right and the alt-left is calling out to beat down. They don't need any more of that.
No, they don't.
They don't need any more of that. They need a vision for their life. And this book gives them a vision. Right. Our God is a God of adventure and meaning and purpose. And I love this about Jordan Peterson, because he talks a lot about this. It's like you have to have an alternative vision. Yeah. And the good thing for the church is we have an alternative vision if we'll, you know, work on re-masculinizing. I think is how you say it. I don't know.
Yeah,
something like that.
I made up that word. I think.
It was a great word. But you know, we have to really bring in the God of the Bible and like really show that like you can still be a man's man. You can, you know, you're supposed to be kind, but kindness is power under control. Yeah. Like you're supposed to have an ordered life. Like freedom, you can have freedom, but it's ordered. It's not chaos. It's not hedonistic. You know, I was just at the University of Texas, my first time there. And wow, I was speaking to all the conservatives on campus. It filled up half of a small auditorium. And one of the things I told them, I opened up, you know, I was kind of there with an event they were having a turning point event, and I opened it up, and I just, you know, I talked a little bit about Charlie Kirk, you know, and then I essentially just said, listen, it's really simple. Spend time in God's word, be planted in a church, get married before you're ready, have kids before you can afford them, and literally be a builder. This was the big thing I said. You can be a destroyer or you can be a builder. You've got to choose. I think the vision that we can give young men, and I'm seeing it in our church, I see it happen. I'm ministering tonight to a men's group that, you know, it's over 40 people. Yeah. And you know, they're coming and many men haven't missed one. I mean, there's like one or two guys that are missing every time. I mean, they're there, and we're teaching them what it means to be a part of that vision. God always calls you up, and there's always an adventure. And that's really the message. And that's what we've got to put back into the church.
Yeah, I agree with that. I love the vision, and you know, we can wrap up here in a sec, but there's this great vision in Nehemiah where they're standing there building the wall, and it says that they would build with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. And I think that those are really the summation of the call to manhood, right? You have to be able to go out and fight your battles, and you also have to be able to build. You have to be able to do both of those things. If you can't do both of those things, you haven't come into the full manhood that God has called you to. When I have a vision, I think, and I know you do too, because you have sons as well, I think every day about who I want my sons to become. And I want my sons to be able to slay dragons, right? I want them to be able to pick up a sword and go out and fight a battle and kill a dragon because they're going to have to. And I also want them to be able to build something with care and precision.
Yeah, they need to change diapers too. Yeah, they need to love their wife. They need to be able to build something productive in society.
They have to be able to do all of those things. And somewhere along the way, we told young men that those weren't good things and they just needed to bottle them up and do away with them. And I think the church calling people back to God's word, like you said, is a church that's going to change the culture. It's going to change those young men's lives. It's going to change the world.
Yeah. Well, you know what? There's only one thing Jesus promised to build.
His church.
And he promised to build his church, and he promised that not even the gates of hell will prevail against it. If we can get a fresh vision for that and bring men along, it's going to be a great future.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Pastor. This has been an awesome conversation.
And fun.
Until next time, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on the Under God podcast. I'm Daniel. I'm joined with our host, Pastor Stephen Martin. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us today on the Under God podcast. If this episode encouraged you, share it with a friend or family member. Your support helps us reach more people with God's word. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at undergodpodcast.com so that you never miss an episode. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, X, True Social, and TikTok for more content, behind-the-scenes moments, and faith-filled encouragement throughout the week. We want to hear from you. Leave a comment, join the conversation, and send us your questions. We will be answering them in upcoming Q&A episodes. Until next time, remember to think biblically about the things that matter most.